Hi, this is Magdi Isa. I'm your teacher for Anatomy and Physiology Bio 201 Lab. This is my last video for this semester, and please do not share this video with any other student. This is the video that covers Lab 13 and 14, the nervous system. First, let's start with an introduction. So, what's the function of the nervous system and what are the components of the nervous system? The first component of the nervous system are the sensory receptors. Here is an example. In the eye, we have sensory receptors in the eye that can receive visual stimuli. Then the sensory input travels on a sensory neuron to the brain. The brain does integration. So you see a water and you're thirsty. The brain knows that you're thirsty. Then motor output travels on a motor neuron to the muscles. The muscles will contract in the appropriate ways and will bring the water towards your mouth. We have two big divisions of the nervous system. We have the central nervous system and we have the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is composed of the brain and the spinal cord. Anything else other than the brain and the spinal cord will be considered peripheral nervous system. So this will include all the nerves and the ganglia, and we'll have definition of these both soon. Then we have the basic divisions here again, the brain and the spinal cord. We have also the peripheral nerves include the cranial nerves and spinal nerves. Now the definition of ganglia. Ganglia are basically clusters or clumps or aggregation of neuron cell bodies that is outside the central nervous system. So usually the neuron cell bodies are located within the central nervous system. So if they are located in the peripheral nervous system, they will be in ganglia. So ganglia are basically clusters of neuronal cell bodies outside the central nervous system. Next, we have a diagram that shows us the junction between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So basically, this is my spinal cord. It ends here. So this part will be my central nervous system, CNS. Starting from this point onwards will be my peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system has two different colors or two different matters. We have the gray matter and we have the white matter. The gray matter, which is this part here, is mainly composed of neuronal cell bodies. So cell bodies. In addition to that, there are neuroglia, which are supportive cells, and unmyelinated neuron. But for now, the most important thing I want you to know about the gray matter of the central nervous system, that it's mainly composed of neuronal cell bodies. The white matter, which is this part here, is made of mainly of myelinated and unmyelinated axons. So the cell bodies and axons are part of the neuron, and cell bodies are mainly in the gray matter, and the neurons are mainly in the white matter. The white matter is mainly made of axons, and most of them are myelinated axons, and the myelin sheet is white. That's why the white matter has this color. Now these axons travel up and down in tracks. So the tracks are basically bundles of axons traveling in the same direction. So these tracks are either ascending tracks or descending tracks, or ascending pathways and descending pathways. So again, this is an FYI slide. This is another FYI slide just for you to understand what I mean by tracks within the white matter. So these are my ascending tracks. So the axons of neurons will travel this way, will go to this area, and will ascend up to the brain. So these are my ascending tracks. They are sensory tracks because they carry sensations from the body. Now the descending tracks travel here. So these ones will go down from the brain and will take this pathway, and they will go to the muscles to contract or to the glands to secrete. So these are my two different directions. Here is a better illustration of my ascending tracks. So these ones, they start at a sensory receptor here. Let's say something, you step on something sharp, so you feel the pain. This sensory innervation will travel all the way to the brain, so you can feel the pain, and you know that you get conscious about this accident. At the same time, if you feel pain in your foot, you want to move your foot, so the brain will give an order that will travel down on a motor neuron all the way to your muscle, so your muscle can contract and can move away from the insult. Next, we have the nervous tissue. So the nervous tissue is made of neurons and of supporting cells. The neurons are the ones that carry the signals. The supporting cells basically they work for the neurons. They give them nutrients. They act as a shield from harming substances. They act as barriers. They cover the neurons with a myelin sheath that allows the signal to travel faster. And we have a larger proportion of supporting cells than the neuron. We call these supporting cells neuroglia or neuroglial cells. These ones do not carry any impulse. They do not transmit electrical signals. That's why they are not excitable. But the neurons are the ones that can transmit the electrical signals. Here is an FYI slide on the special characteristics of neurons. Because neurons are excitable, they can carry electrical signals, they can live forever, and they function forever. They do not divide, unlike our epithelium, for example, that divides. They have a very high metabolic rate, so they need lots of oxygen to carry their function, and that's why neurons, they die fast if you cut oxygen on them. So it takes only 5 minutes for a neuron to die. Epithelium will probably take much longer than that time. Here's an important slide of the parts of the neuron. We have a cell body, which is here. We call this soma as well. You guys remember the word somatic means related to the body. Then we have a neuronal processes. Some of these are short. We call these dendrites. And the only one that's really long, we call this an axon. And at the end of the axons, there will be synapses. So we have here synapses between an axon of a neuronal cell and our cell here. The cell bodies, as we said, they are mostly located in the central nervous system, and if they're not in the central nervous system, we call them ganglia. The function of the dendrites is to receive signals from other neurons, and they transmit this signal towards the cell body. From the cell body, the signal will travel through the axon to either another cell body of another neuron or to a muscle cell, either cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, or smooth muscle, or it could go to a gland as well. because glands receive innervation so they can do their secretions. Synapses, which is an FYI slide, is basically the area where neurons communicate. So we have a presynaptic neuron before the synapse and postsynaptic neuron, which is after the synapse. So we saw this picture before. Here is my axon of a neuron. So this is a neuron here. It has an axon, and that axon will synapse or communicate with a dendrite of another neuron. So we call this area of communication here synapse. So as you can see here, these are my neuron signals traveling through the neuron, and they come towards the end here. They stimulate the release of neurotransmitters so the signal can travel to the other neuron. Now let's talk about the central nervous system in a bit more details. The central nervous system has different directional terms. So we used to have superior, inferior, medial, lateral, and proximal and distal. In the central nervous system, we have two more words that we would like to know. We have rostral and caudal. Caudal means towards the tail, and rostral means towards the nose. The first part we'll talk about in the central nervous system is our spinal cord. And the spinal cord is made of segments, just like our vertebral column has segments. And these segments will give you spinal nerves. So spinal nerve that is T1 comes from the spinal cord region or segment that is T1. On the spinal cord, we have a couple of important structures that we need to identify. We have the conus medullaris, and we have the cauda equina. The conus medullaris is basically something like a cone, which is the end of the spinal cord, because the end of the spinal cord is pointy. It's like a triangle. And the cauda equina, it's the spinal nerves at the end of the cord. They look like horse tail. So cauda equina basically means horse tail. So here is my spinal cord. This is my cervical region of the spinal cord. It is where the cervical spinal nerve exits. This is my thoracic region, lumbar region, and sacral region, and we have also coccygeal area. So where does my spinal nerve ends? Actually, my spinal nerve ends here. So the spinal nerve is shorter than the spinal canal. So, or the vertebral canal. So vertebral canal is much longer. But this is because we grow much faster in our bones than our nerves. So if a baby is born, the spinal cord will be like this, and the spinal canal will also be like this. So they are the same level. However, as you grow, the bones grows faster than the nerves. So you get a spinal canal that's very big, and you get a spinal cord that is much shorter. However, these nerves would not move. They will still exit from their respective points. Okay? I hope that this makes sense. If it does not make sense, please ask me to draw this for you on the table, on the board, I mean, in the class. Okay. So this last part here is my conus medullaris, because it's like a triangle. And these spinal nerves that are still going down after the spinal cord has ended, these ones, they look like a horse tail. That's why they're called cauda equina. So these two terms are really important to know. Here's a lateral view of your segments. as you can see up to this point here, I have my spinal nerves from the cervical region. Then I have from the thoracic region, then the lumbar region, then the sacral region, and finally the coccygeal region. Here's a nice view of the cervical part of the spinal cord. So here is my spinal cord, and these are my spinal nerves. Here is we're looking at the lumbar part of the spinal cord, sorry, the thoracic part of the spinal cord. So this is my spinal cord here, and these are my spinal nerves. In the lumbar region, the spinal cord has already ended. It ends between L1 and L2 vertebrae, and the spinal nerves are still going down, and they make this horse tail that's called cauda equina. Then there is also a small ligament that travels from the conus medullaris all the way down. We call this ligament here the filum terminale. So the filum terminale is basically a ligament or a thickening of the dura mater that goes all the way from the conus medullaris to the end of the spinal canal and inserts at the end of the sacrum. So what's the purpose of this filum terminale? It basically gives more stability to the spinal cord so it's not moving as much. We need here to cover the anatomy of the spinal cord. So the spinal cord, as you can see here, has again a white matter and gray matter. The gray matter is like H-shaped or butterfly shaped. The spinal cord, just like the brain, is covered by three spinal meninges. We have the bimatter, the arachnoid, and the dura. And you need to know these ones in order. The dura is the outermost, the pia is the innermost, and the arachnoid is in between. The dura is called so because it's durable, because it's strong and tough. The pia means delicate, and arachnoid basically means spider web. So as you can see here, these little spider webs like projections, this is my arachnoid matter. Here is another picture that shows you these three layers. So the one that's completely stuck to the spinal cord is my pia mater. Then the second one after that is going to be my arachnoid. And the third one here is my dura mater. And as you can see, this part here is like again H-shaped. This gray matter of the spinal cord is H-shaped. And it has components on it. These components are anterior or ventral horn, which is this area here, ventral horn. It has a posterior or dorsal horn. And in the thoracic region only, we have also what's called lateral horn. And the lateral horn is the origin of the sympathetic nervous system. Then you have gray commissure, which is basically what connects the two sides of the gray matter together. We have also the spinal cord, which we will cover shortly. Here's a very nice picture that shows you the components of the spinal cord and spinal nerve. So this part here is my spinal cord. And these here is my spinal nerves, which are made of two rami that we will talk about. You can also see very well how these ligaments here is called denticulate ligaments, and these ones are important because they kind of stabilize the spinal cord. So as you're moving, jumping, and running or walking, the spinal cord is not floating inside your spinal canal. It's basically kind of stabilized in place by these indicular ligament and also by the filum terminale that we saw previously. Now let's talk about the brain. The brain is complex structure important for intelligence, consciousness, memory, and other stuff. Then what we need to know here, some basic embryology. So how did your brain start? Well, your brain starts as part of a tube called neuronal tube. So this neuronal tube gives you both the brain and the spinal cord. This part towards your nose, we'll call it rostral, and the part is towards your tail, we'll call it caudal. So your brain starts at the tube. And on these tubes, the swelling starts to occur. So some enlargements of the tube occurred. That occurs around week 4. So the first enlargement or swelling or vesicle, we call it the prosencephalon or forebrain. Again, it's called prosencephalon or forebrain. The second vesicle, we call it the mesencephalon or midbrain, while the rhombencephalon or hindbrain is the last part or the last vesicle. This occurs around week 4. Then around week 5, vesicles start to make more. So the prosencephalon, that was only one, now actually makes 2 telencephalon vesicles. In addition to that, it makes also a diencephalon. So the prosencephalon gives you the telencephalon and the diencephalon. The mesencephalon is nice. It's not going to change. It's just going to give you one mesencephalon. The rhombencephalon, it will give you the metencephalon and the myelencephalon. Now what happens? Well, these ones will become larger and they will do some folding and they will give you different structures. So what are the adult structures that come out of these ones? I want you to know that telencephalon gives you the cerebrum, which is the biggest part of your brain. The diencephalon gives you different structures. We'll call them together the diencephalon. And they're very easy to know because it gives you the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. The mesencephalon gives you one structure, which is the brain, midbrain. And the myelencephalon gives you the pons and the part of the cerebellum. Sorry, the metencephalon gives you the pons and part of the cerebellum. And the myelencephalon gives you the medulla oblongata. Now, I understand that this is very difficult, and what I want you to know basically is these two sides of the table. I just want you to be aware of the embryological origin. You didn't have to know this by heart. Just know, please know these parts here. It's important to know that the telencephalon, in addition to giving you the cerebrum, it also gives you the lateral ventricles as well. The diencephalon gives you the third ventricle, and the midbrain gives you the cerebral aqueduct from the mesencephalon, and the metencephalon, which gives you the pons and the cerebellum, also participates in the fourth ventricle, while the myelencephalon, which gives you the medulla oblongata, also gives you the fourth ventricle. Now let's go to next. So here's an FYI slide just to let you know about the how did this tube give you your brain. So this is your tube, and all the structures here are very separate. And this is by week 5. In week 13, the cerebrum or the telencephalon becomes much larger, and as you can see, it has already swallowed here the diencephalon in between. Then week 26, more rotation and more growth, and finally at birth you get this brain. Now, the basic parts of the brain organization, and this is an important slide. So I want you to know that the brain is divided into four regions: the cerebral hemispheres, the diencephalon, the brain stem, and the cerebellum. The brain stem has three regions: had midbrain, pons, and medulla. Then you need to know about the gray matter and white matter and what they're composed of, which is the same thing that like what we saw in the spinal cord. So the gray matter are still made of neuronal cell bodies. The white matter are still made of myelinated axons. And we need to know that there are the neurons are located within the brain in two places, the neuronal cell bodies. They're located into the cortex and other areas called the nuclei. We will see these two in this picture here. So the picture is an FYI slide. However, it's important that you know the locations. So this part here, the outer part here, is my cerebral cortex, and that cortex includes the neuronal cell bodies. Then whatever is inside here, these are my axons. So as you can see, the cortex here, which is the outer part, is my gray matter. The inner part here is my white matter, which are my axons. And as you remember from the spinal cord was butterfly-shaped gray matter, and the white matter was outside. So here is the opposite of this structure, or structure organization, I should say. So in the brain, you have the gray matter outside, you have the white matter inside. Now, inside the white matter, there is another collection of gray matter. So these collections, we call them nuclei. It's not the nucleus of the cell, but it's a neuronal collection of cell bodies. We call them nuclei because they are within the central nervous system. Now here is another picture that shows you these nuclei. We have different names for them. I just want you to be aware that there is a gray matter inside the brain and outside the brain as well. Brainstem. The brainstem, we have midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. So these are the three different parts. And if you look at the brain from below, you can see that the lowest part here is your medulla oblongata, which is continuous with the spinal cord. And then above that you have the pons, which is this one here. And above this you get the midbrain. The midbrain is really hard to see unless you cut the brain into two halves, which we will do in the lab so we can see it much better. Then as you can see here, I have the midbrain, the pons, and medulla. So this is my brain stem. The cerebellum is a part that is behind the pons and the medulla. So this is my cerebellum. We need to know a few structures on the cerebellum. We need to know the arbor vitae, which is basically this white part inside the cerebellum. So the white matter of the cerebellum is called arbor vitae, which means the tree of life. So arbor is tree, and vitae is life, like vital signs. And arbor is like, it's in Spanish and French, this means tree, or similar to that. They have similar words. Then, as you can see here, this is my cerebellar cortex, which is this outer part. So the organization of the cerebellum is similar to the cerebrum. You have a gray matter outside in the cerebral cortex, and you have the white matter inside, which we call arbor vitae. Then the diencephalon, and as I mentioned, the diencephalon is three main components: thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. And these ones, they are borders of the third ventricle. We haven't spoken about ventricles yet, but the ventricles in the brain are spaces that are filled with CSF fluid. So we will see these ones and we'll talk about them. For now, just know that this is my lateral ventricle. This is my third ventricle. And this is my fourth ventricle. So I have two lateral, 1/3 and 1/4. Then where is my diencephalon? My diencephalon is basically making the walls of the third ventricle. So this greenish part. Let's talk about the cerebrum in a bit more details. The cerebrum is made of different lobes. So we have a frontal lobe, we have a parietal lobe, we have occipital lobe and temporal lobe. And these ones are similar to the names of the bones that we have on the skull. However, they do not completely coincide with them. What I'm trying to say here, probably the frontal bone will end at this point. However, the frontal lobe extends a little bit more. Between the frontal and the parietal bones, we have a depression we call the sulcus. So it's really important to know this. So the sulcus is basically a bigger depression between different lobes. We call this my central sulcus. An elevated part in front of the sulcus, we call it the gyrus. So we have a which is before, pre-central gyrus, and post-central gyrus. So the central sulcus is the one that makes the boundaries of between the frontal and parietal lobes. We have also parieto-occipital sulcus that makes the boundary between the parietal and occipital lobe. And we have the lateral sulcus that makes the boundary between both frontal and parietal lobes superiorly and the temporal lobe inferiorly. So here is a cross section, as you can see. Here is a gyrus, here's another gyrus, and this depression here is a sulcus. So we have fewer different definitions. We need to know the gyrus, which is basically these ridges between the sulci. The sulci are grooves, and we have bigger sulci. We call these ones fissures. We have two big ones. We have a transverse fissure and we have the longitudinal fissure. We have also the lobes, which follow the main skull bones. And in addition to that, we spoke about the central sulcus, which is very important to know for exam purposes, and the pre- and post-central gyri, which are also important to know for exam purposes. These gyri have different functions. So the pre-central gyrus has a mainly motor function, and the post-central gyrus has mainly sensory function. The post-central sensory. Then the parietal and occipital sulcus and lateral sulcus, these ones we saw as well. So here is my fissure, longitudinal fissure. So the longitudinal fissure is the one that divides the brain into two halves. So we have two cerebral hemispheres. We have the right cerebral hemisphere and the left cerebral hemisphere. And as you know, the right cerebral hemisphere controls the left half of the body, and the left cerebral hemisphere controls the right half of the body. Here's another picture that shows you the longitudinal fissure. Here's another one that shows you also the longitudinal fissure. And as you can see also the sulci and gyri. So this one here is my pre-central gyrus. The sulcus is the one that I am coloring in red. The gyrus behind it is my post-central, which is a part of the parietal lobe, and the one that's in front of it is pre-central, which is a part of the frontal lobe. Here is another picture that shows you the sulci and the fissures in the gyri. So here is my lateral sulcus, and this one divides the parietal and frontal lobes superiorly from the temporal lobe inferiorly. And we have the lateral sulcus, which is a big one here, and that one divides the cerebrum from the cerebellum. And you can also see the lobes here as well. We have a frontal lobe, have my parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobes. Now, an important structure here is called corpus callosum, and the corpus callosum is this white part here. Corpus callosum is the communication between the two sides of the brain. So the right side of your brain knows what's going on in the left side of your brain. So these are white, and if they are white, this means that they are myelinated axons. Now here is another view that shows you the corpus callosum. So if I have center, let's call this A, on this side of my brain, and I have another center A on the other side of my brain. So the fibers will travel from this center here to the other center here. So these ones can communicate together. So let's say you are moving your thumb here, and this is the thumb on this side of the body. Let's say this is my right side. So this is the part of the brain that's responsible for moving the thumb. Now, the right side of the body needs also to know what's going on with the right hand, even though the right side is not controlling the right hand. But in order for us to have better communication, we need to have this connection between the two similar parts of the brain. So how do we do this? We do this through myelinated axons that travel between the two parts of the brain that control the same function. We have another structure here called septum pellucidum, and the septum pellucidum is basically this structure here. This one is the like boundary between the two lateral ventricles. So this is a lateral ventricle and this is another lateral ventricle. Here's an FYI slide that shows you the corpus callosum, shows you different parts of the brain stem as well, and also shows you the cerebellum. Now next is my peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is consistent of nerves, and these nerves are made of neurons. So here is one axon, and this axon is covered by myelin sheath, and different axons together, they make something called a fascicle, and this fascicle is covered by connective tissue. We call it the perineurium. So these different fascicles together, they make my neuron, and they are covered by the epineurium. So of course this is an FYI slide. I just want you to be aware of the structure of the nerve and how it's made of different neurons. And even nerves could include blood vessels in them because these neurons need nutrition. Cranial nerves. We have spoken briefly about cranial nerves in the previous unit. Now we need to know these cranial nerves in a bit more details. We have 12 pairs of cranial nerves, and we give them Latin numbers. So you need to know these numbers, and this is the way that you're gonna write these cranial nerves on the exam. So if you write CN1, this means cranial nerve number 1. Okay. So these cranial nerves are mainly control structures in the head and neck. The only one that extends beyond the head and neck is the vagus nerve, because this one goes to the thorax and abdomen as well. So let's start with this view that shows you all cranial nerves. This one here is my olfactory nerve. The olfactory nerve are these small dots here. They are on the olfactory bulb, and they make the olfactory tract. The second one here is my optic nerve. The third one here is my oculomotor nerve. The trochlear nerve here is number 4. So as you can see, these nerves are actually given numbers based on their location, which makes them easy. Then we have number 5 is my trigeminal nerve, which is a big nerve that has 3 branches. Tri here means 3, geminal means divisions, though then that has 3 divisions. Then after this we have cranial nerve number 6, which is my abducent here. So the abducent is between the pons and the medulla, and the cranial nerve 3 oculomotor is between the midbrain and the pons. So 3/6. So 3/6. So these two are at the junctions. Then cranial nerve number 7 and 8 are my facial nerve and vestibulocochlear nerve. These ones are so close to each other. The facial nerve is more medial. The vestibulocochlear nerve, which is number 8, is more lateral. Then we have cranial nerve number 9, 10, and 11. So cranial nerve number 9 is my glossopharyngeal nerve. Number 10 is my vagus nerve. Number 11 is my accessory spinal nerve. And number 12, which is the last one here, is going to be my hypoglossal nerve. So let's talk about these nerves now. The first one is my olfactory nerve, and this is the one that travels through the cribriform plate of ethmoid bone. As you can see, it's here on the superior part of your nasal cavity, and these are very small tiny nerves. Once these one enter to the skull, they make the olfactory bulb, and then olfactory tracts takes them to the olfactory area of the brain. Second one is my optic nerve. The optic nerve starts here, the retina, and this is going to be my optic nerve. Now a part of the optic nerve crosses to the other side, and that cross section area is called my optic chiasma, and whatever behind that we call the optic tract. So we have optic nerve, optic chiasma, and optic tract. Just let me remind you that the optic nerve travels through the optic canal. Then we have the oculomotor nerve. So oculo is eye, motor is mover. So this is my eye mover. So this one supplies all of the extrinsic muscles of the eye except two. So these two are superior oblique, which is supplied by cranial nerve number 4, and lateral rectus, which is supplied by cranial nerve number 6. Other than that, all muscles of the eye, the extrinsic muscles of course, they are supplied by oculomotor nerve. So where do we find this? Well, that one comes from the midbrain and travels through the superior orbital fissure and supplies all these muscles. So what are these muscles? Well, we have the medial rectus muscle, superior rectus, inferior oblique, and inferior rectus muscle. In addition to that, we have the levator palpebrae muscle, which also is supplied by the oculomotor nerve. The oculomotor nerve also gives parasympathetic innervation, or I should say just autonomic innervation to the iris muscles. So here is my extrinsic muscles of the eye: superior rectus, inferior rectus, medial rectus, and lateral rectus. Here's my inferior oblique, and here is my superior oblique. So these are 6 muscles. In addition to that, we have another muscle that elevates your eyelid. We call it the levator palpebrae superioris muscle. The next nerve is my trochlear nerve, which is number 4, SO4. So superior oblique muscle supplied by cranial nerve number 4. So this muscle here travels like this and make an angle. So that's why it's called an oblique muscle. And this one is supplied by cranial nerve number 4, the trochlear nerve, which enters the skull enters the orbit through the superior orbital fissure as well and comes from the midbrain. A big nerve here that we need to be aware of is my trigeminal nerve, which has 3 branches, and these 3 branches are coming off the trigeminal ganglion, which is here. These ones are my ophthalmic division, which is this part. Then we have the maxillary division. Then we have the mandibular division. And these ones, they leave the skull or the cranial cavity through 3 different foramina. The ophthalmic division travels again through the superior orbital fissure. Then the maxillary travels through foramen rotundum, and the mandibular travel through the foramen ovale. And I hope you remember these foramina from previous unit. And they supply structures in the face. The first thing they supply is the skin. So as you can see, the first division, or V1, V is cranial nerve number 5, and 1 stands for ophthalmic. V2, which is cranial nerve number 5, 2 is maxillary, and the V3 is for mandibular. So if you divide your face into 3 different parts, the V1 will take the upper one, the V2 takes the skin of the middle part, and the V3 takes the skin of the lower part. In addition to their sensory innervation, they also supply muscles of mastication, and these muscles of mastications are 4. We have temporalis muscle and the masseter muscle, which we saw in the lab. We have also the 2 pterygoid muscles, which we did not see. We have the medial and lateral pterygoid muscles. So all these muscles, they are supplied by trigeminal nerve, all these 4 muscles. So these are muscles of mastication. They allow you to eat and chew food. The other muscles of the face are not responsible for that. They are muscles of facial expression, and they're supplied by a different nerve. Then the cranial nerve number 6 is my abducent or abducens nerve. Both are right. And these ones abduct the eye. What muscle this one innervates? It's the lateral rectus. So the lateral rectus is the muscle that's on the lateral side of your eye, which is here. So when this muscle contracts, you look outwards. So that's what this action is called, abduction. We have the facial nerve after that. So the facial nerve is the one that supplies the rest of the muscles of the face, and these are the muscles of facial expression. So does this facial muscle supply temporalis muscle? No, because this is a muscle of mastication. Does it supply the masseter? No, because it's a muscle of mastication. Does it supply the pterygoid muscles? No, because it's a muscle of mastication. Other than this, frontalis, yes. The orbicularis oculi, orbicularis oris, the levator palpebrae superioris, the mentalis, all these muscles of facial expression are supplied by the facial nerve. In addition to that, the facial nerve also supplies all the glands of the face except one. So what does it supply? It supplies the lacrimal gland. Here, supplies the sublingual and the submandibular gland. And supplies also the palatine glands in your palate. Supplies all the glands of the face except one, and this one is going to be here, and it's called parotid gland. Here is an important picture that shows you the innervation of the tongue. The innervation of the tongue comes from 3 different nerves. The first 2/3 of the tongue, they're supplied by the facial nerve. So the sensation, the taste sensation comes from this nerve. Then the lateral, or the posterior 1/3 of the tongue is supplied by cranial nerve number 9, glossal from tongue, pharyngeal nerve, and the vagus nerve. So again, for taste sensation, you have 3 different cranial nerves that are responsible for carrying taste sensations from your tongue. The anterior 2/3, facial nerve. The posterior 1/3, glossopharyngeal and vagus nerve. The other sensations that are not taste sensation, like touch, for example, if you touch your tongue, anterior 2/3, these ones are carried by cranial nerve number 5, which is the trigeminal nerve. The next nerve is number 8, which is called vestibulocochlear nerve, which is basically two nerves together. The vestibular nerve is this part here, and the cochlear nerve is the other part here. One of them is responsible for hearing, the other one is responsible for balance. The next nerve is my glossopharyngeal nerve, and this one supplies again the posterior 1/3 of the tongue with taste sensation. This one leaves the skull through the jugular foramen, and it supplies the one gland that the facial nerve could not supply, which is my parotid gland. It gives motor innervation to only one muscle, which is my stylopharyngeus muscle. This one starts the styloid process and is inserted into the pharynx. It gives also the pharyngeal mucosa. So from the name of the nerve, you can kind of derive its function. Glosso, because it gives sensory innervation to the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. To be more specific, is taste sensation. Then it gives also the pharynx, as you can see here. It gives one muscle called stylopharyngeus and gives the sensory innervation of the mucosa of the pharynx. In addition to that, it gives only one salivary gland called the parotid gland. The big nerve is my vagus nerve, and this one extends beyond the head and neck. It supplies structures in the head and neck, but it also carries parasympathetic innervation to the heart, to the GI system as well. Next is my accessory spinal nerve, which is cranial nerve number 11. And this one is kind of weird nerve because it has spinal innervation and cranial part. So it has spinal part and cranial part. And this one, the spinal part ascends through the foramen magnum, and then it joins the cranial part, and both of them exit again through the jugular foramen, and they supply two muscles. These two muscles you need to know is my sternocleidomastoid and trapezius. So only two muscles are supplied by this nerve. The last cranial nerve number 12, is hypoglossal nerve. And this one is going to exit the skull through the hypoglossal canal. And it's called hypoglossal nerve because it comes below the tongue here and supplies all the extrinsic and the intrinsic muscles of the tongue. So this is a pure motor nerve. So it supplies all the muscles that are within the tongue or muscles that are attached to the tongue. Then we have to cover the spinal nerves. The spinal nerves are like this. We have cervical part, thoracic part, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal. And these ones are kind of similar to the numbers that we have before for the vertebrae. So the vertebrae we had 7, 12, 5, 5, 4. Here we have 8, 12, 5, 5, 1. So this cranial nerves of the cervical area are 8, they're not 7. And the cranial nerve of the coccygeal area is not 4, it's just 1. That's why we have 31 pairs of the spinal cord. The spinal nerves, but we have 33 vertebrae. The reason that we have an extra cervical spinal nerve, because we have also spinal nerve that exits above C1. So there is a spinal nerve that leaves the spinal cord above C1, so that gives us an extra spinal nerve on the cervical region. All other nerves exit below the corresponding vertebra. So if I have C1 vertebra, the cranial nerve that leaves after C1, if we have C1 vertebra, we have a C1 spinal nerve that leaves above it, and then we have a C2 that leaves below C1. And then when you go down to C7, so you will have C7 that leaves above the cervical vertebra number 7, and we have the C8 that leaves below the cervical vertebra number 8. Then if you go to the thoracic region, if this is my T1 vertebra, I'll have T1 spinal nerve, and if this is my L2 vertebra, I'll have L2 spinal nerve leaves below it. Now, the spinal nerves are made of rami. They're made of roots, and then they give you rami. So the spinal nerve itself is very short, very small. It's only this part here. So this part is just my spinal nerve. It has a dorsal root or posterior root, and it has a ventral root or anterior root. And then it gives you rami. So I have a ventral ramus and a dorsal ramus. You can call it also you can call it also anterior ramus and a posterior ramus. So where is my sensory part? Well, the sensory nerves, they travel all in the dorsal root. The motor nerves, they all travel in the ventral root. Okay? So do not mix the roots with the rami. So here are my roots on this side. Now the rami is on the other side. I have the ventral ramus, which is mixed. It has sensory part, has a motor part. And we have a dorsal ramus, which has a sensory part and a motor part. And these ones, they go. So the dorsal ramus will go to the back muscle and skin, and the ventral ramus will go to the anterior muscles and skin. I hope that this makes sense. Okay. So here again are my roots, and these roots actually, they're made of small rootlets. They come together and they make one root. Here is my ventral rootlets that come together and make one root, and these two roots, they make one spinal nerve. Next are my nerve plexuses and peripheral nerves. So we spoke about the ventral rami, and we said that these ones go primarily to the limb muscles. Now let's be more specific, and let's talk about our very first plexus. We have what's called brachial plexus. What makes the brachial plexus? Well, the brachial plexus is made of ventral rami, and these ventral rami start from C5 to T1. So we have C5, 6, 7, 8, and T1. The C5 and 6, they come together, they make a trunk, upper trunk. The C7 goes by itself to make the middle trunk. And the C8 and T1, they make the lower trunk. Then these trunks, they will divide and give you divisions. So we have the anterior and posterior division from each trunk. Then these divisions they come together and they make a different organization. We call these cords. So we have the anterior, so we have lateral, medial, and posterior cord. Then from the cords, these will divide and give you your terminal nerves, which we need to know. So I want you not to worry much about these structures. I want you to know just the first part, which is that the brachial plexus comes from C5 to T1, and I want you to know that once these different organizations are done, you get your terminal branches. I want you to know these terminal branches. We have the musculocutaneous nerve. It's called musculo because it supplies muscles, cutaneous because it supplies skin. We have the median nerve because it's in the middle. We have the ulnar nerve towards the ulna. We have the radial nerve towards the radius. And we have the axillary nerve, which goes to the axilla. Here's another pretty picture that shows you the C5 to T1 and how they undergo different organization, and finally you get these nerves. So for exam purposes on the cadavers, you need to be able to identify these nerves. I have M shaped here. You can see this M here. Okay. So this M, the middle part of the M is for median nerve. The most lateral one is the musculocutaneous nerve. And the most medial one, which is basically here, is my ulnar nerve. So this is my M. If this M is more superficial, so if this M is reflected a little bit, you can see that I have a big nerve that travels here and another small one that goes towards the axilla. So the one that goes towards the axilla is my axillary nerve. The one that travels down is my radial nerve. You will see this on the cadaver, and you need to be able to identify these 5 nerves. In the lower limb, we have different nerves. We have femoral and sciatic nerve. Sciatic nerve gives you tibial and common peroneal nerves. Here is a picture that shows you also the femoral nerve. So femoral nerve is the one that's in front of the thigh. It's a nerve that branches right away to supply different structures in the interior compartment of the thigh. Sciatic nerve is on the back of the thigh, and this one goes down here above the knee. It gives you 2 big nerves, the common fibular or common peroneal and the tibial nerve. The next structure that we need to talk about are the duras. So the duras or the meninges, these ones they make the coverings of the spinal cord and the brain. So we have a dura mater, arachnoid mater, and a pia mater. And as we said before, the pia mater is the innermost, arachnoid is in between, and the dura is the outside. So there are spaces also between these ones. We have the epidural space. So epi means above the dura. Subdural space is below the dura. And the subarachnoid space is below the arachnoid. And what you need to know is this one has CSF. Here is my, again, picture that shows you all different layers. This is the skin of my scalp. This is the bone. The first layer here is my dura mater. Second one is my arachnoid. As you can see, these spider webs here coming down from the arachnoid. And the last one here that's just on the brain is my pia mater. So what's here below the arachnoid? This is my subarachnoid space. So what do we have in the subarachnoid space? We have the CSF. It's very important to know this part. Here is a picture that shows you all these 3 layers. The first one here, the tough one, is my dura, and the arachnoid is just below that. The one that's on the brain is going to be my pia mater. Next to the CSF is my cerebrospinal fluid, and this one is made continuously and it's being removed from the ventricles. So as you can see here, I have my lateral ventricle, which is C-shaped. I have 2 of them. And then I have my 3rd ventricle. I have after that my 4th ventricle. and the fourth ventricle is continuous with the central canal. Between the two ventricles that connects them with the third ventricle. From the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle, I have a connection called the cerebral aqueduct. Also, you need to know the parts of the lateral ventricle. So you have anterior horn, you have a posterior horn, and you have an inferior horn. And as you can see, it's like a C shape or horseshoe shape. So the lateral ventricle also has C-shaped or horseshoe shape. Then the third ventricle, as we covered before, it is surrounded by the diencephalons on each side. So here is how your CSF is being made. Your CSF is made in the lateral and third ventricles, and it moves through the cerebral aqueduct to the fourth ventricle. From the fourth ventricle, it can either travel through the central canal of the spinal cord or can go around the brain in the subarachnoid space, travels all the way here, and then at this point here, it can be taken out or absorbed back by the arachnoid granulation or arachnoid villi. So I have two structures I want you to know. Which one makes the CSF is my choroid plexus. Which one drains the CSF is my arachnoid villi. Okay, so we are done. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that you had a chance to read the PowerPoint and see the video before you come to class, because this is not an easy lecture. Have a great day.